All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on performance management in the healthy organization. I'm Deanna Berger from Palo Alto University, and I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Ken Dolan-Del Vecchio. Ken is a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical social worker, and senior professional in human resources. He's an author, family therapist, and vice president in Prudential Financial's Global Health Organization, responsible for behavioral health programs and services for the 20,000 employees in the U.S., including consulting with leaders on creating a healthy environment in the workplace and other aspects of leadership skills. Ken's joining us today to bring us his expertise in this area, and he wants it to be a conversation with our participants as well, so please feel free to add your questions and comments throughout the duration of the webinar today, and I'll be moderating those. You can use the chat or the Q&A box to do so, and we're recording today's webinar as well, so for friends who weren't able to make it, or if you'd like to watch again later, we'll make that available to you. So without further ado, Ken.
Thanks very much, Deanna, and thank you, Tim Bima, also for your work in bringing this program to Palo Alto and the community that surrounds your university. And as Deanna said, I'm very interested in having this be a discussion and not just me talking at the screen. So please do send your chats in, and we will stop periodically. I'm going to ask you to comment and raise some questions and challenges and thoughts as we go through, and hopefully we'll have a lively conversation, because it's that kind of an exchange that I think creates the best opportunity for learning. So I will start by letting you know that in health and wellness here at Prudential, one of our key focuses is on helping leaders to be their best at leading their work groups at all organizational levels, so that we see health not just as an individual effort, but one that spans multiple systems levels and multiple dimensions. And I'll share a little bit more about the breakout of what I'm meaning in a minute, but I want to let you know that that's the framework from which I'm approaching this topic. And so, trying to advance here. Okay, did that work? There we go. So here's what I hope to cover. I hope to talk with you about power, because being an organizational leader is an exercise in power. I want to talk about how one uses one's power in an organization. I want to give you a couple of models for understanding how we approach power. I want to talk about leadership as, at its core, an effort to create health and productivity. Health and productivity. Health is a foundation for everything that we do in life, and certainly work is a key part of what we do. And so if we can be at our best health, we can also be as productive and as creative and make the best contributions that we possibly can in the workplace as well. And then we want to talk about performance management. Performance management, of course, being the effort by a formal supervisor to help one of the team members who reports to her or him to do their best work and to give it the highest level to the shared mission of the organization. You have to bear with me a little bit. I'm a little technologically impaired. So I have on this slide a couple of ways of understanding power. And if you're a clinician, you've probably read quite a bit about this. I'm presuming that perhaps you might have read The Chalice and the Blade, and you might have read some of the works of bell hooks and others who look at power and systems of power. And there's a couple of guiding ways that we can make sense of power. The first one is power over. And unfortunately, this is the model that we see most in our society and in most societies. And in a power over model, power is understood as the right to control people and resources, the right to dominate. And so we see dominance hierarchies. We see structures in which people report up a chain of command And that's an extremely formal kind of reporting structure in which those who are higher in the hierarchy can direct the talents and the energy and the time, the use of time by those who report to them. And then the alternative is power with. And power with is an approach to power in which power is understood as responsibility. Power is understood as the responsibility to create shared success, to foster the activities of those who are part of one's group, to do the best that they can collectively for a shared achievement. And so power over would be the kind of power that you see a military leader demonstrating, a dictator demonstrating. Power with would be the kind of power that you see an orchestra leader demonstrating, where their responsibility is to bring everybody together and to create harmony and to create movement forward that's going to be constructive for all involved. And so we have some different bullets here that give some highlights or hallmarks of the different kinds of power. So on the left we have power over, it's all about domination. Power with is all about facilitation. Power over is about command and control. Power with is about taking responsibility for all good things to happen as the result of shared activity. And so on down the chain here. And in my organization at Prudential, as I believe in many organizations, there's kind of a tension between these two frameworks because we have a very clear hierarchy. And that hierarchy is understood by all, and it is experienced by each of us. So I've been at Prudential for 19 years. I came here as an associate manager. I was a counselor in our EAP program, and I've since risen through the ranks, as they say. Even that word is a replication of this idea of power over. I became a manager, I became a director, I became a vice president. At each of those changes, people around me tended to respond to me differently. And this is probably similar in your organization, that there's a certain kind of way that one is listened to differently. There's a certain kind of deference that might be given. And that kind of structure, by its very nature, creates that kind of pattern of interaction. Also at Prudential, we have what have been called leadership competencies. So leadership competencies are measures that everybody in the organization is appraised against every 6 months. And those leadership competencies, there's 7 of them. They include things like clearly develops a strategy, takes intelligent risks, collaborates with others. But the key ones that I often use in training and rely on here in this organization are demonstrates a moral compass and has a talent mindset. And so demonstrating a moral compass means that we're always thinking ethically and we're always behaving ethically toward others. And if you link that to talent mindset, that means that we are helping all of the people around us to develop their talents and to develop their increasing potential to contribute along the path of their career that they choose. And so the first part, the hierarchy, is power over, but the leadership competencies ask for power with. And so that's where I try to lead managers and supervisors at all levels. And I think that this kind of attention is probably present in many organizations, even in human service organizations that have as their goal helping people in a variety of their life spheres. So I'm going to stop there and just ask if there are any comments, questions, points that you want to make about these two visions of power.
And viewers, go ahead and type into the chat or the Q&A box any questions or comments that you'd like to give to Ken, and I'll moderate those for you. Ken, one question we have is about the balance between as a leader being responsible for something and doing the things that you're talking about with the power with and developing talent and things like that. When you're a leader who has the responsibility, but also has the responsibility to share that. How do you balance those things?
So we're going to talk more about that. It's a very important point because a leader has ultimate responsibility. It's the how. It's all in the how that you get the work done and that you, as is often said, achieve through shared efforts. And so it's about the activities that you do every single day that help the people around you to feel like they're valued, to feel like they are, that what they do is recognized and shared up the chain of command, and at the same time that they're held accountable. And so we'll move forward because that's a very important point, and it'll help us to shape our conversation as we go forward. So we at Prudential, as I said, think about health in a holistic fashion. And so we think about health as having at least these 5 distinct dimensions. And when I say dimensions and I say distinct, that's really for describing them. They are interwoven. One bleeds into the next. They are each supporting the whole. And so we look at health as, from the individual perspective, the habits that we practice every day of our life. So we can achieve our best health by practicing habits that are going to help us to be at our best. And I say optimal or our best health because each of us have particular gifts of nature that may give us strengths or may give us challenges. So we look at this as a starting place for the ways that we can take the best care of ourselves. And I'm not going to spend so much time on this visual, but I want to go to the next one and spend a bit more time on that. And this is the one that is about what a leader perhaps will do all the time, every day, in relationships with the people who they have responsibility toward, to help them to be at their best health so that they can make their strongest contributions. And I believe, and I've seen over and over and over again, that performance management is that solid, constructive performance management rests upon daily interactions with one's team in which you are supporting them and you are role modeling a host of behaviors that create a particular kind of culture within your team, so that you are the seed for a culture that is described by some of these bullets here. And that if you do this, you're then going to be in a position where you can help people to give their best contributions, you can help them to voice their concerns, you can help them to feel welcome across all of their differences, and you can help them also to raise questions about things like ethics and even about concerns about other team members, and know that whatever questions or issues or contributions that they make, they're going to be responded to constructively. So let me stop here and ask if you have any reactions, comments, questions about what you see on this slide.
Again, go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A box. All right, we have a question or comment also. I love this, the idea of a manager maintaining daily contact, interested in people. I'm curious to know, do you feel that this is possible to do for employees who work remotely?
Absolutely. It's a really great question. It's absolutely possible to do. And it's done by checking in on the phone and asking them some, this stuff, the way I think about it, is very simple behaviors that have to do with human to human connection. So it's things like calling in the morning and asking, how are you doing? How was your weekend? How are the family members or the people who are most important to you, the people who are closest to your heart? It's about making sure that you speak to all of your team members in a similar fashion, that you don't affiliate more with some than with others. It's about letting them know about the programs and services that the company offers across all of these dimensions. And absolutely, I think that it can be done. I've seen it be done remotely. Much of our workforce operates either part of the time remotely or a good bit of the time. In fact, some people are full-time remote. Also, there are many teams that are dispersed. So the supervisor may be in Minneapolis, members of the team may be in Pennsylvania, other members may be in Iowa. So there's a great need for connecting across great distance. And sometimes it's done by video, as you're seeing here. And the ways that we stay connected to each other are extremely important. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, another comment is I'm sure this is coming from we're in Palo Alto, we're right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and a lot of Silicon Valley companies, people work 7 days a week, 70 to 80 hours a week. So when the kind of the company culture is that way, how do you recommend implementing some of these behaviors and this culture in that setting?
Well, many of those companies, the way I understand it, have in some ways fused work and life. And that is a very particular kind of environment. And I believe that people need to have fulfilling lives that give them the opportunity to contribute through their work, but also to have lives where perhaps they're engaged in community activities, perhaps they're engaged very, very much with the lives of their families and their friends, and with interests and hobbies that maybe have nothing to do with work. So that to me is very important. And I also feel like it's very healthy for people to be able to set limits on their work. And in some companies, there's a great respect for flexibility in that regard, so that, for example, you may feel that it is useful and most efficient for you to stop work at 5 o'clock and to leave the office. Others may feel that they're going to socialize part of the day and that they're going to do some work, and then they're going to maybe do some thinking time as part of the day, and then they're going to come back and do work. And thinking time, of course, is work time as well. But I believe that one of the things that's most important is to not have fixed expectations that people give their lives over to their work. And that, I think, and I've seen over and over again, erodes health and erodes productivity. So people who stay in the office from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. may be present, but they're oftentimes not able to give anywhere near as efficiently and creatively and effectively as if they perhaps restricted their hours some and also refresh their batteries by being outside the workplace. There are some people, though, for whom it works, and their lives really are about work. And I think that that's a choice for some people. What I don't think is constructive is when the norm is that people are going to be working 12, 14 hours a day, and that expectation is rigidly in place for everybody. And so as a leader, I think that it's very important for you to demonstrate a healthy balance for yourself, because if you're in a formal leadership role, your team is watching you. They're paying attention to the way you behave, and they're noting if you are working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or if you're working from 2 a.m. to 10 p.m. And for example, they're noting whether you send emails in the wee hours of the morning. And I will coach leaders that they should avoid doing that, because it, just by the fact that you do it, even if you say, I don't expect you to respond, it is very common for people to feel pressed to respond, because in fact, that's what's being modeled, is that I'm working all these hours and I expect this of myself. And if you are the role model, then the implicit expectation is that others should follow suit. So I think it's very important for leaders to keep reasonable business hours, to go to lunch, to talk about how they take care of themselves physically, to perhaps go to the gym during the day if there are gyms on site, or if they perhaps come in the morning and mention that they have done their walking or whatever is the way that they take care of themselves, to talk about the ways that they're safeguarding their financial security. All of these things are important for leaders to model, because they're the seeds for their culture. And I want to just tell you a story that I think brings together a lot of what I'm looking to communicate here. And I wish I could share this video with you. I don't have the technology to do that, perhaps another time, but there's a video that I like to share, and it depicts or features one of the presidents of Prudential's business division. She's the president of the retirement organization. And then there's an executive who manages risk for the organization, and he's featured as well. He had a problem with alcohol. So he is an alcoholic, and his behavior at work was extraordinarily difficult. It presented all kinds of performance problems. And she had to confront him on that. And you see in the video, they're talking together. This is several years later, after he's gone into recovery. They're talking about that time in his life. And she's talking about how she had to confront him and how she referred him to my program. And he's talking about how he got into recovery. All of that's important. But what I think is of greatest significance in some ways is to ask people to consider, what kinds of things did that leader, her name is Chris, what kinds of things did Chris have to do every single day, day in and day out in the workplace, to lay the groundwork for her to be able to have that kind of a conversation with Rob and have it go the way it did? That's the foundation for performance management. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about this as a foundation for performance management. Because if you do the kinds of things that are shown in this slide, and Chris, I'm sure, does each of these and then some, you are creating a feeling in your group in which, when you come to them with these extraordinarily challenging performance discussions, they're going to receive them in a particular sort of way. They're going to receive them in a way where they feel this is a person who has conveyed over and over again that they have high regard for me, that they care about me as a human being, that they see me as somebody who is valuable and contributes a lot of meaningful work to our shared endeavor, and that they have my very best interest at heart. That's the culture we're all going for, I believe. And that's the kind of culture in which the hardest of conversations are likely to be received in the most constructive fashion. And so that's part of why I think that is why it's so important to talk about this content as we move into a discussion about performance management. I saw that maybe there's another question or comment.
There is, yeah. It's as kind of a follow-up in that Silicon Valley, Bay Area kind of lifestyle question. So the participant says, why do you think the culture of the Bay Area now is work long hours, stay for the free dinners, and people seem to be recognized only when they work long hours? I used to work at the startup, and this was noticed. They expected us to answer emails immediately, and now I have become this way. I don't seem to take a break now from emails. How do we get back to a work-life balance, even when in a leadership role at work?
Yeah, well, it takes courage, I think. It takes courage, it takes limit setting. I'll tell you another story. So I was consulting with a man who worked in a technology organization here at Prudential, and he was telling me a story about what had happened in his group. And what had happened in his group was that he was one of 10 technology directors, and they were responsible for global support for the company's technology. And so they would each have to take call on a rotating schedule. And it would happen, and taking call meant that they would be available through the non-working hours, through the evening and nighttime hours. And it would happen about every 7 days, if I remember correctly, that they would be on call. And the leadership of this group, downsized half of those 10 directors. So there were now 5. And this man was coming to talk to me because it was overwhelming. He was getting calls on Sundays when he was coaching his son or daughter's sports events, and he would have to go home and spend the rest of the day working. And he was looking for another job. And he was talking with me about managing his stress. And what we talked about is putting limits on his work time, because his leadership did not believe that there was any issue. And interestingly, so now there's 4, because one of the team was on disability, which is bound to happen in these kinds of circumstances. Interestingly, I had the occasion to be talking with exactly that leadership team during the same time frame. And one of them happened to mention to me that his group was the one where they had downsized from 10 to 5. And I couldn't reveal the confidential conversation that I was having with this other gentleman, but I asked, so how is that going? Because you had 10 people, now you have 5. And he mentioned that one of them was out on disability. And he said, it's going fine. And I asked, how do you know that? How do you know it's going fine? And his response was, because nobody's complaining. And to me, that's such a cautionary tale for leaders, because if you think about it, it would be the leader's role to check in with the people who report to him or her and to know something about what they're requesting of those people, and to find out if they feel overloaded, to know them enough, to be connected enough to be able to gauge that and to have honest conversations. Because of course, what happened in this case was that the director who I was speaking with left. He left the organization. He found another organization where he could be more balanced and he could work reasonable hours. As a leader, I think that the courageous position to take is to demonstrate that for yourself, to work reasonable hours and to expect the same of your group, and then to argue up the chain of command if you need more resources, and also to negotiate things like deadlines, things like what the absolute priorities are. Can we let go of some priorities? Can we push them far to the side? We did a program here a few years ago. It was called Optimizing Human Capacity. And the whole focus of it was to emphasize for senior leaders down the chain of command. We started with the senior leadership of our sales force, that people have 24 hours in the day, and during that time, we have to get done everything that constitutes our lives. And that it requires all leaders of people to understand that, to understand it and to be sensitive to it. and a compelling reality is that if leaders don't do that, the kinds of things that happen in that work group I was just describing will invariably happen. People will get sick, they'll go out on disability, others will leave. Many will be present but not really functioning. And the term for that these days is presenteeism. Have you heard that term? It's being present but absent at the same time. And as a leader, I think it's imperative that you take a stand and that you embody a normal sort of pattern of working and doing the other things in your life. Now, I understand that there are some cultures within which that is simply not possible. That if you do that, you will be ostracized, and the only thing I can say about that is that then it's important to be looking for another place to be. One of the things that we teach here is that every one of us has not just one job, but two. And the two jobs are as follows. We have the job that we are contracted to do for our income. So the work that I'm doing here at Prudential for my income. And then I have the job of stewarding my career. And that job is the never-ending one of making sense of my personal mission in the world and figuring out, does my current work fit that mission adequately? And what's my next step? What do I want to learn? How can I broaden my network? What kinds of opportunities are available to me? Paying attention to the larger world outside my workplace, getting more training, doing more reading, connecting with people who I can learn from, having mentors, networking as it's called. All of that is part of that much larger and, the way I see it, never-ending part of our lives that can be considered part of our work. And I just think it's reality for us to keep that in mind. And if we do that, then generally we'll feel more empowered. We'll feel like I have options and I can do other things. And what I'm doing now suits me as best it possibly can, given the plan that I have for my life moving into the future. Does that answer the question? It's a very, very hard and reality-based question that you ask. And I think it's something that challenges most of us, many of us, because we live in a world in which there's just so much unrealistic demand for more and more and more with less and less and less in terms of human beings and other resources. So I'll stop there and ask for your reactions.
The person who asked said, yes, thank you for that.
Okay. Other comments, questions that you see?
That's all we have now. Any other questions at the moment?
Okay. I just want to ask you a question, the group a question. Have you ever worked for a leader who doesn't do many of these things? For a leader who comes to the office, walks right by you, doesn't say hello, perhaps goes into their workspace and closes the door, doesn't come out very much, doesn't pay attention to how the team members are interacting with each other, when perhaps there's evidence that there's a conflict that's going on, and not a good conflict. They don't take any role in trying to mediate or bring people together, plays favorites, has a lot of affinity for some people but not for others. How many of you have had that kind of experience?
Getting some yep comments.
Yep, okay. So how many of you have had that kind of experience in a social work, a clinical setting, an institute, a university setting of one sort or another? An agency setting?
Yeah, it sounds like yes. Yeah, we've got
Okay,
a
all
number
right.
of yeses and
And,
some big
and
yeses.
okay, and the reason I wanted to punctuate that is we all know what it feels like to be there. And in fact, there may be, I don't think any of us who actually work or have worked in these kinds of settings hold on to this mythology, but there's a mythology that in agencies that serve people, that somehow there's a more humane culture, that leaders behave in ways that are more thoughtful and and supportive and facilitative. It has not been my experience, both as a worker in those kinds of organizations and as a consultant to people who work in those kinds of organizations, that that is true. And so I just want to make that point, that those of us who are clinicians and our colleagues, we do not automatically become good leaders. We don't. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Even great clinicians sometimes move into a leadership role, and they don't bring the kinds of skills that we see here to that role, because somehow they default into that power over framework again. And so one of the things I think it's important to say is we need to always be looking at ourselves. We need to be looking at ourselves and seeing how we're doing with this and checking in with the people who report to us, because that framework is so omnipresent and so reinforced in the world around us as the model for the expression of power, that I think it can grab a hold of even those who strive to resist it. And so I just think that's an important point, and I want to emphasize that. So we'll move forward, and I want to just give this whole list of what I see as the role modeling that good leaders provide, and ask you to take a look, think about these, give me any comments that, which ones do you particularly like? Are there any that surprise you? Are there some that should be there that you don't see that we should add? What do you think of this?
One comment says, list looks great.
Things that surprise you there? Things that you'd like to see more of? Something we should add? Okay, we'll move forward. So, the first performance expectation, whatever job we have, wherever we work. Is there a comment?
Yeah, there's a comment. One participant says they agree with the list. How does a person know they're doing it?
Yeah, well, I think that we can check ourselves. We can look at ourselves and ask the question, am I doing these things? What would other people say? What would the people think of the people who report to you? Perhaps even ask them if you feel like there's a safe enough environment for them to answer you.
Another comment is, was accountability on that list? Another comment is maybe a 360 review.
Yeah, okay, great. 360 review. Holding self and others accountable is on the list, and it's a key one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea also is that you can hold others and oneself accountable within a framework that's loving, so that we can be kind to each other while also holding accountabilities, that we
Mm-hmm.
can say things to another person that's constructive while also holding them accountable, and that we can say things even to our supervisor that is said with kindness and in a conversational tone, without while being direct and also being quite challenging.
Yeah, that commenter also said, I like accountability because the manager can be honest about making a mistake without becoming defensive.
Extremely important for people who have a leadership function to mention the mistakes that they've made, to mention them openly without a whole bunch of fanfare, to do that with some degree of frequency, because that creates the invitation for others to do the same, for others to know that it is acceptable to be human and to make mistakes, that mistakes are an opportunity for learning, and that they often are evidence of our willingness to take reasonable risks. So, let me see. So this is something that I see put aside too much, that many times people who are technically very strong but behave in ways that are not consistently respectful and courteous to others are given a pass. And one of the things that I always reinforce, and my team here always reinforce, is that no matter what your function is, the first performance expectation is that we always behave in a way that's safe and civil and respectful, welcoming of people across dimensions of difference, and all that comes from these kinds of patterns of behavior, that we're always predictable, that we're not the kind of person who you have to check the look in their eye before you decide whether or not it's a good day to approach them. And that if a person isn't behaving according to this performance expectation, then you should counsel them on it. If a person comes into a meeting and rolls their eyes or raises their voice, then it makes sense to counsel them on it. Perhaps the first time to do it privately, if it isn't too much of a demonstration of that kind of behavior. If the person keeps doing it, to challenge them very directly in the public sphere of that meeting. We talk with supervisors a lot, more than you might expect, about this very, very simple performance expectation. And performance management, again, this is a bit of a review, is an ongoing process. It occurs within, at best, a very trusting relationship. It is not an ambush. It is a conversation that goes on regularly. I liked the way you did that. I liked the way you came prepared to that meeting. I liked the way that you managed our time, that kind of thing. And perhaps it seemed like you weren't particularly well organized when you came in today. Was there something that had taken away your ability to get prepared for the meeting this morning? Very, very simple, positive, and constructive comments to a person. It's very important to catch people doing what's right, to mention when you see them doing something that's good. You can, in my opinion, you cannot overdo comments that are positive as long as they're sincere and they're substantive. It is always a good thing for people to hear, you did a good job. I liked the way you handled that, and then be specific about it. And also to let people know the good things you hear about them, and to let your supervisors know what other people are contributing, to give credit where credit is due, to run credit up the chain of command. All these kinds of things are very important, and it's very important that you do them for everyone. So in a performance conversation, here's a very simple formula, if you will. Performance conversation where you need to advise somebody about a change they need to make. You need to be able to describe the behavior as though you are watching the video replay. You need to be able to describe the behavior as though you're seeing it unfold and you're describing the facts. You're not diagnosing, you're describing the facts. And so I saw you come into the group this morning, and I saw the way that you were speaking with Betty, and I heard you raise your voice. I'm keeping with the performance, with the behavioral performance stuff here, and it was loud enough so that I could hear from 3 cubes down, and here are some of the words that you said, and I need you to know that that was not okay. And then from there, and you can then describe what would be positive behavior. So when you speak with other people, it's really important that you keep to a conversational tone. It's really important that you use courteous civil language always, and that you talk with them in a way that is going to leave them feeling like there's something constructive in terms of next steps that they can do. And that's what I need from you. And I'm going to be paying attention, and I'm going to let you know when I see you doing that. And I'm going to let you know when I see you doing something that I think needs to be done differently. And if you were to keep behaving in this sort of a way, then there might be some kind of a formal recognition of that. So this is an informal conversation. If we have to have this conversation a couple more times, there's going to be a document that memorializes it. And those kinds of conversations are very important, and the accountability is the part that says there's going to be some kind of escalation in consequences if this doesn't change. And I can tell you that I was once called to one of our executive areas because there was a gentleman who was being exited from the organization. He had behaved egregiously toward many of the people reported to him, and he had been given 3 final warnings. 3 final warnings. And on this third one, they were going to terminate him. Nobody should ever receive 3 final warnings. They should receive 1 final warning. And that should then be followed by a termination if their behavior for which they're being warned happens again. Because if there is no reality to consequences, then people learn quickly that such consequences are meaningless. This is important both for the individual and for the organization, because people talk with one another regardless of whether or not they're told that they shouldn't do that. So I'll stop there and just ask for comments, responses, reactions. Is this familiar to everybody on the line?
Comment, or question, can you speak to kind of this type of situation, but dealing with underperforming team members who aren't quite meeting expectations, and kind of work with them?
Sure, and again, I would describe for that person exactly what the deficit is. And so exactly what it is, exactly how they're underperforming, whether it is something that they're doing in terms of not getting enough work done within a particular time frame, or that maybe they're making too many mistakes. I would show them evidence of that. And then you need to ask, how can I help you? What can I do that perhaps can help you to do better at this, and get their active input. And from there, follow through. One thing about performance consulting or performance counseling is it should never be a one-shot deal. It should always be checking back. And when you've got a serious issue, it's important to check back, I would say weekly at first, and then negotiate with the person who you're speaking with how frequently you should check back with them. And sometimes it's useful to say, look, it would be important for you to do some kind of developmental activity that will help you to do this better. So maybe you should do some reading. Maybe you should enroll in a course. Maybe you should you should find somebody to mentor you with this. Can I help you with any of that? And when it comes to those kinds of efforts, what I would do is ask the person to first make an effort to determine what they want. And you want to get the person who needs to develop their skills to take some initiative on behalf of their development. So you're not just saying, here's what I think you should do. Give them some options, ask them to look for the specific path, and then consult back. They can bring you the book, they can bring you the course. They can say, I'm going to sign up for coaching. How does that sound? And then you can talk through with them whether or not that sounds like a good fit. So those are some ideas in that regard. Other questions, comments?
Not at the moment. Any other questions or comments you want to type in?
Okay. So very important to have policies and to use them. And when I've done some training with clinical teams, agency leaders, oftentimes what they tell me is that basically the policies are there, but they're there because they have to be there. And I think that policies are important because they create the baseline expectations and they allow for consistency. And they make it so that nobody in the organization can say that they're being treated capriciously. And that's really important because your relationships with the people who report to you have got to have a professional foundation. And that foundation lays on top of policies. And so that's why I think this is important. And sometimes that's news to people in all sorts of teams. And so I just want to emphasize that and leave that with you and ask if there's any questions or comments about that.
Question, have you worked with organizations that have very few or few policies that are enforced, and how did you consult with them?
So we have an organization here in which the policies are extremely skeletal. Extremely skeletal. And that is by design. It's both to make them very simple, and it's also, quite frankly, to make them so that they are easy to defend. Because if you have policies that are extremely articulate, and then they're not followed to the letter of their description, there's room for all sorts of arguing about inconsistencies. And so our policies are very skeletal in terms of things like workplace behavior, substance abuse in the workplace, the use of technology. What we have, though, is we have conversations about significant performance problems in which the people who are responsible for those policies, and these are human resources professionals, speak with the managers about how those policies have been applied over time, how those policies have been used. And so one of the things that you're bringing up, and I think it's really important, is that when it comes to performance counseling, that's getting to a place where you're beginning to come up against significant consequences, up to and including the possibility of termination. It's important to have collaborative conversations. So to have conversations that include not only you, that are just not about you individually making decisions, but you and your supervisor and you and the human resources function at bare minimum, so that you all are working from the kinds of precedents that will generate consistency in application of policies. I've also worked with organizations that have extremely specific policies. And in that situation, there is much less room for making, shall we say, more individualized assessments of how to proceed. So there's benefits to both, but I can tell you that I'm most familiar in working with an organization where the policies are fairly non-specific, but they hold very specific baselines as to what cannot occur in the workplace. People cannot be inebriated in the workplace. People have to speak with one another with civility in the workplace. They cannot do things that others would consider intimidating or menacing or threatening. Those kinds of directives.
Great. Well, participants, we have a few minutes left. Any other comments or questions on these areas?
And I just want to then bring us to this final point, which is really a guiding thought for me. This is a quote. Jewel Kilcher is a singer-songwriter who you may have heard of. And this idea that in the end, only kindness matters. I just think this needs to be a guide for everything we do in organizational life and in other aspects of life. And that the best results come when we interact with each other with kindness. And even if we have to hold people accountable, even if we have to, as a colleague of mine says, terminate people with kindness, we can still do that. We need to respect each other's humanity. Each of us has value as a human being, and yet we also have to work together in a work organization to make certain achievements happen and to provide service to those who are our customers or our clients. So it's been a great pleasure to speak with you, and I'm happy to take any other questions. I can stay on for a little bit if you want to talk more about this. And again, it's been a great opportunity to share some of this content with you.
Thank you so much, Ken. We'll stop our recording here.